We'd like to begin this podcast by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
This podcast is brought to you by Sprinkles and Sprouts, where the food is generous, garlic and cheese are measured with the heart, and there is always room for seconds. Find them at sprinklesandsprouts.com.
I got my first real six string, bought it at the 5 and dime, played it till my fingers bled.
My ears are bleeding.
It was episode 69. What do you reckon?
Well done.
Thanks.
Very good.
Thanks, mate.
I thought you were going to go off on a totally different
Yeah,
tangent
I
then.
know you were worried. Yes.
I was worried. I was sitting here going, oh my God.
Shit.
Oh my God,
What's
this
he
is a
gonna do
serious
with-
episode.
What's he going to do with that? It is a serious episode. It's a great one too, Mel. Anyway, welcome back, everyone. Episode 69, Talking Couch Potatoes.
Howdy, howdy.
This is a ripper, mate, because, as I've said, Mel, we come at it from various angles, don't we? We come at it from welfare, we come at it from gambling, we come at it from corruption, we come at it from governance, you name it, mate. We're coming at it this time, Mel, from the economic angle.
We are.
Yeah.
Yep.
We've got Stephen Walters, who is a consultant economist. I'll tell you all about him later, but he's going to tell us why it's a furphy, it's a fantasy, it's a production number that the racing industry comes up with their economics, and he's going to tell us why. Before we do that, Mel, anything going on with the inquiry? We haven't heard much or said much about it lately. I guess they're in the sitting stage, are they?
Well, they've actually gone on break for winter.
Yep.
Parliament has. So it won't be tabled until either August or September. That is when the report will be tabled from the Environmental Committee or the Public...
Standing committee on...
Environment and Public Affairs. So, yes, they are putting the report together, which is their recommendations from the information that they received in the over 5,000 submissions, plus the hearing.
To quote the committee, unprecedented number.
That's right.
Of submissions. That says something to me.
I really hope it translates.
And are the birdies saying anything? Are the little birdies telling you anything, or is it all
there is just nothing.
Yeah, okay.
It's crickets, which I really hope they are affording to every player
every stakeholder.
Yes, exactly. I really hope that's the way that it is.
Let's not forget, Mel, that even if you listened last episode, the Greyhound Protection League of New Zealand, they've just achieved a ban. But we had a brief chat about their timeline. It was a process.
Absolutely.
And each little strike we make is part of the process toward finally getting there.
That's right. And we wish that it could be legislated out as easily it was legislated in 50-odd years ago in WA. But, yeah, we're living in a different place right now and things are always harder to rub out.
Yeah.
And just for any pro racers listening, because the thing for me is that when they start saying, oh, it's a political game, this party's just doing that or that party's just doing that because of it, that's the only reason that it was legislated to begin with, was to appease political parties and to make sure that they were getting their grubby little mitts on the tax. So let's not pretend that greyhound racing was ever legislated into Parliament for anything other than money and political gain.
Yeah, the beautiful irony of the pro racers, and I don't want to disparage them as an entire group, but I think we could fairly say that it's a bit on the nose for them to say politicians are playing politics. Normally we trust them to act with integrity. No, you don't.
Bollocks.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't actually give a rat's ass. I don't give a rat's ass if someone took a giant big bribe to end greyhound racing. I'm fine with that. 100% fine, as long as the dogs stop dying.
Yep.
I'd love it to end for all the right reasons. I don't care if it ends for the worst reason possible.
As long as it ends.
Less dead dogs. And we haven't done stats for a while, Mel, but they're still dying.
Yep. No, absolutely.
They're still dying.
Yep.
The longer we wait. Alrighty. Anyway, I can't get hepped up right at the beginning of the episode.
No.
All right. I'll calm myself down. I got my first real six string. All right. Foster of the Fortnight, Mel.
We do have a new one this week. His name is Red, and he's a handsome, gentle boy who can be shy and wary of unfamiliar people, often choosing to avoid strangers until he feels safe. That's like a majority of us, I think. He needs patience and time to settle, but once he's comfortable, he becomes an affectionate, cuddly companion who loves belly rubs, roaching, and being close to his people. He forms strong bonds and is very much a Velcro dog. He eats well and is not fussy with his meals. He gets along well with other greyhounds and has greeted other breeds politely, though further testing would be beneficial because he's probably still a little bit scared still to get too close. On walks, he shows little interest in small dogs, wildlife or squeaky toys. He took around 2 weeks to become comfortable with a young child in his foster home, but he's now friendly and gentle. So he would best be suited to a home with respectful kids aged 6 and older who can give him space. He does like to be with company most of the time, but he could do 4 to 7 hours at home with another dog with no issue. He's shown no signs of resource guarding, sleep startle or medical concerns. He's sweet and sensitive, looking for a patient family who will help him build his confidence and show him the world is a safe space.
Oh. How old was Red? Did I miss that?
He's 2.
Oh, he's just a baby
He's
boy.
a baby.
And I'm gonna fall from the stars straight into your arms. That's simply Red.
Red, yes.
Yeah.
And I'm on the Greyhound Adoptions website now.
Is he adorable?
And he's very cute. He's very sweet.
So go to Gower, Greyhound Adoptions WA.
Yeah.
Check him out. I'm prone to a little hyperbole at times. I can gild the lily now and then, Mel. But I will tell you, with all honesty, you will not regret getting a greyhound.
No,
Yeah.
you won't.
What else is going on? Anything else, Mel?
There's nothing
Is that
really,
about
no. We're in a little bit of a winter hiatus too.
And we
Keeping
haven't-
warm and dry at home and just waiting. It's in a holding pattern right now to hear what's going to happen, what the recommendations are, and then we take action.
Yeah. Again, the longer we wait, the more beautiful, otherwise healthy hounds
Die.
perish. So let's not wait too long. Mel, I want to say a little bit about our next guest. Well, about what our next guest has done. So he has created the Animals Australia Cost Benefit Analysis Greyhound Racing in WA 2026 report.
Mm-hmm.
And in the past, we've had Sebastian Broadhurst,
yes.
who really spoke to some of the inaccuracies, the exaggerations, the obfuscations that the industry uses to prop up their legitimacy in terms of financial benefit.
Yeah, particularly in regard to the IER report that they put out annually-ish.
Yeah.
And some of the figures that were used in that and the methodologies they used.
And what Stephen's done, he's gone a step further and he's done an independent report that actually comes up with some real figures and takes everything into account.
Yeah, all costs, that's right. And it is independent. I know they like to say, oh, but you paid him for it. Yeah, well, no shit, Sherlock. RAWA also pays the IER to do their reporting.
Everyone pays everything for everything.
Exactly.
The conclusion is that it destroys economic value, and WA is set to lose around $36 million in economic value this year alone. That's pretty stunning. They're stunning numbers, especially on the back of the other mobs claim that they are an economic net benefit.
Yeah.
So not only are they not a net benefit, even a small amount, they're a massive net deficit.
Yep.
I want to hear all about this because, my main thing is I just don't want to see dogs dying or in pain or suffering, and I want to have them have the best lives they can possibly have. But I know that a lot of people do care about, well, hang on, is it making money, Well, guess what? It's not even doing that.
That's right. When you take all the costs into account, which they haven't been doing.
No, of course. Well, they wouldn't want to, would they?
Because again, as Emily mentioned to us last week, who has a vested interest?
Yeah.
Yeah, they want it to continue, so they're not going to shine a light that isn't positive on it.
Yeah, right. And the report hasn't been released yet, Mel?
No, because it was commissioned by Animals Australia. It's up to them to make it public when they wish to.
So we're getting a sneak preview of its author and probably a world exclusive interview, I'd say.
Actually, no, to be fair, he was on 6PR the morning of the hearing here in Western Australia because we were given permission to present it to the committee at our hearing. So the committee have it.
Yeah, but that's talkback radio. No one does that anymore. It's all podcasters were. So we're the first world exclusive podcast.
Absolutely. Yes, to have a discussion with him. Yeah.
So I can't wait to have a chat to Stephen. I'll ask him if I can call him Steve-O, and we'll take it from there.
We will.
All right, Mel, here we go.
Yes.
I can't wait to do a deep dive into this.
I know. It's a really interesting episode that we've got now and a guest, and it'll be, well worth a listen.
Because we've chatted to economists, we've chatted to people who understand the financial side, the gambling side, but it's mostly been a criticism of what the other mob bring in.
Yep.
So we're going to talk to Stephen Walters, who is an independent economic analyst, and he's got his own firm. Big shout out to this firm, by the way, Optimal Economics. Lives in Sydney now, but grew up in Perth, and the family is still in Perth, so he's still got some strong connections to Perth. And the big thing about Steve that I like is he's done a dive into the actual economic viability or sustainability or benefit, whichever one to look at, of WA racing in Perth, cost-benefit analysis. And I can't wait to say hello, and he's with us right now. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Matthew, how are you?
Excellent. I'm really looking forward to this. You know, Mel knows some amazing people, but I'm particularly intrigued by this because we try and attack this problem, this issue from multiple angles: welfare, governance, gambling issue. This is the first time I'm aware of, at least, that someone's done a deep dive into the economic cost-benefit analysis. So I can't wait to hear what you got to say.
Great.
I guess we know that previous studies have been commissioned by the racing industry. Can I just start, before we get on to what you came up with yourself, what you found were the biggest methodological flaws in terms of the studies that were sponsored by the industry?
Yeah, look, there has been other studies done. We were commissioned to do from the ground up, like start from a blank page and think about things like what are the benefits and what are the costs. Now, other studies have done that, and there's been a few actually that have been sponsored by the code. So that should give you a bit of a clue as to answer your question. They inflate the benefits. So they include things like gambling, the amount of money that people spend gambling on dog racing as a benefit, and they exclude all the costs, like the damage done by gambling, which has been pretty widely documented pretty much everywhere. Any of the animal welfare problems that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point on this recording.
Indeed.
So they do, yeah. So look, you can come up with pretty numbers that look pretty good if you exclude all the costs and inflate the benefits. And that's pretty much what they did. So we did look at those studies because there might have been some parts of them that might have been worth either replicating or testing. But honestly, they were, again, the clue is on the name on the tin. They're being sponsored by the code. So, of course, they're going to come up with a pretty supportive answer that greyhound racing adds a lot of value to the economy. It just doesn't.
That's a really good point that you bring up around being sponsored by the industry. Can I ask you, though, to answer the counter-argument, which we get all the time, that your study was sponsored by Animals Australia? The other mob will say they'll apply the same argument in reverse, won't they, that we're just going to look at the negative side. What's your response to that?
Yeah, look, I understand that criticism, but like I said right at the start, we decided to take a blank sheet of paper, and no one from Animals Australia or anyone else who was involved in the study said, hey, can we inflate the costs? Can we minimise the benefits? And by the way, as you said, I run a professional consulting business. I've got issues around my own credibility that I can't put out a study that says, well, I was sponsored by Animals Australia and therefore it's going to be leaning heavily that way. That's just not the way we work.
Yeah.
We get commissioned by all sorts of people to do studies. And the reason we get commissioned is because we do independent work. So, sure, we might have been sponsored by AA and they might have paid us a small amount of money to do the study. That's all true. But we did an independent piece of work, and I'm happy to stand behind it as an independent economist.
Yeah, right. And I think that's the bottom line is, are you looking into something in an objective manner, or is there a level of confirmation bias, I think is the layman's term for it, where there's a result we want and can you have a look at this and come up with that result? Or what I guess you've done is, could you have a look at this, tabula rasa, blank slate, and tell us what the actual situation is? And it sounds like that's that's what you're saying.
Yeah, it definitely was. And to be honest, I wouldn't do work in that first category because it's just not the way I work as an independent, credible economist. Like if someone did commission me and say, yeah, we want the answer to be 3.5 and have a big benefit or whatever the number might be, I would be immediately suspicious as to why they're asking me to do this work. So, no, we don't do that at all. We look at it, as I said, we genuinely looked at it as a blank sheet of paper. And there are benefits from greyhound racing. There are, like, people attend the meetings and there's taxes paid by the code and there's all sorts of money spent on dog breeding. And so we included all those. We did include benefits. If I was being biased, I would have left all those out,
Yeah.
like the code-sponsored studies did, leaving out all the costs.
Yeah.
But we didn't. We included all those.
Yeah.
I'm glad I wanted to get that out the way because it is a common retort that we get from the other mob that we're heavily biased. And I think being a part of Free the Hounds for quite some time, the one thing I do know is there's a level of integrity and a desire to explore and understand the truth. Because once we know the truth, then we can make reasonable decisions.
Well, it's the only way you can do it. You can't. Otherwise, you're preaching to the converted. There's no point hiring an independent economist like me and telling them the answer, because I think what you'll find is what I alluded to earlier. We probably won't do the work.
Yeah. Now, getting on to some of the aspects of the report you came up with, we've noted that the gambling costs pretty much dwarf every other cost category. I think it quoted over 110 million this year, Mel. Is it this year or last year? This year alone.
Yeah, 2026 alone, $110 million.
How did you arrive at that figure? And again, speaking to what you've maybe already spoken to, why did previous studies leave such a significant cost out?
I think the answer is pretty obvious. They were code-sponsored and they wanted to minimise the cost. So they didn't even include the fallout from gambling is what I've measured, and I'll come to that in a second. What they measured is the amount of money that's spent on Western Australian greyhound racing on gambling as a straight-out benefit.
Right.
Now, that's a very one-dimensional way of doing it. Like you might spend $100 at a dog track betting on the race. Now, that is money spent, that's for sure, but you got to look at what happens thereafter. And so we looked at that, and we started from the point of view of there's well-documented studies nationwide, frankly, not in WA, but I'll come to that in a second, nationwide, showing that Australians lose about $25 billion per year on gambling. Now, we are amongst the world's biggest gamblers. We know that. That's part of the Aussie sort of folklore, I suppose, is that we're big gamblers. We'll bet on anything. But we tried to drill it down into Western Australia, and we did that. We know how much wagering is done on greyhound racing. We know how much of that is in WA. And WA typically is a lower gambling state than other jurisdictions because, of course, you don't have pokie machines outside the casino. I live in Sydney, as you said earlier, so we've got pokie machines everywhere. So WA is slightly lower. So we worked through all those numbers. We worked through the various shares of gambling losses, but we were looking at gambling losses, not gambling expenditure. And so we had to value things like family breakdown, job losses, all the externalities, we call them in economics, which are things that are second, third round costs like loss of income. A lot of people who gamble heavily end up losing their jobs. They have higher drains on the mental health system. And of course, if you're gambling, you're diverting money away from what you could have spent on, say, a new pair of shoes or a new book for your kids to go to school. So we looked at it a lot differently to those previous studies, and I think it's the proper way to do it. And on the flip side, there is a margin, and I know the tab in Western Australia is still owned by the government. It's the only one still owned by the government.
Yeah.
They actually do get a benefit from gambling, but it's a margin. You can't just count the $100 that I mentioned earlier. You need to actually look at what it actually costs as well to generate that $100. So it's a vastly different number to what the previous studies had used, unsurprisingly. But it is a really big cost because we know it cascades through not just the economy, but right through society and through families and devastating losses that come from gambling. Not just problem gambling. A lot of it is problem gambling, but we looked at all kinds of gambling, and those numbers are pretty clear.
Yeah. Places like the US and that, what have they found that since racing has ended, has there been a major loss to the economy in any of those places? Do you know?
Hard to say, Mel, to be honest. The stats aren't great. And we know that Australia is one of the few places in the world now that greyhound racing still takes place. But it's still a bit early to say, to be honest. And it's very murky to identify, well, here's what happened. We stopped doing this particular activity in the US, it's dog racing. And here's what happened to the economy. But we know the US economy is doing pretty well at the moment. So it certainly hasn't caused huge problems, but I think it's still too early to say. We can't really tell.
Yeah. But because Australia has that, I guess, more of a culture of gambling, would they be likely to take it to somewhere else? They'll gamble on something else rather than stopping to gamble altogether because the dogs go?
Probably. And we've seen that in plenty of other studies from other parts of the world. And we've seen that in Australia, that when you actually make it more difficult or you close down a particular area of gambling, and we did make this assumption that Australians gamble, and frankly, the people that are gambling on dogs are often not in WA. They're typically young men. They gamble on anything from basketball in the US through, I guarantee you, the World Cup soccer tournament, you name it, they'll gamble on it. And that's a problem. I know that's not something we can talk about necessarily right now. But so, yeah, look, we were a bit pessimistic about this, that if you shut down greyhound racing in WA, that gambling dollar largely will go somewhere else. There'll be some reduction in gambling because people, they do like going to the dog track and watching dogs run around. Frankly, not many of them. The annual crowds going to dog racing in WA is about 60,000 people. Like, it is tiny, but they still gamble. So they won't be able to do that anymore once greyhound racing is shut down. However, the young blokes, let's be honest, who are gambling on it, probably shift their money to somewhere else. And it could be baseball in the US, or it could be soccer in Argentina. That money will go somewhere else. But this is how people are gambling these days, apparently.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's online. They're not sitting at a dog track. They're doing it at home. They're doing it online. And if there's not a dog race in Mandurah that they can bet on, they'll bet on something else.
Yeah, that's the feeling. Or that's speaking to the public. That's what they tell us that, that go on.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of studies into this, and there's a lot of data. And we did engage with various groups in the industry who obviously we disclosed we were doing a study, but did talk to people in the industry, and that was the feedback we got as well.
Yeah, okay.
But, the previous studies, when I went through them, and I did look at them pretty carefully, and they left out the cost of gambling. I immediately became a bit suspicious about the way the study showed that greyhound racing generated a massive benefit to the WA economy. Well, of course it does, because you're not including any of the costs.
Yeah, right. That's a fantasy, I guess, that a lot of people live under, or a level of ignorance that the racing industry basically pays its own way. Can you speak to the fact that what your report finds is that, in a sense, we are effectively subsidising the racing industry around prize money, breeding bonuses, track infrastructure? You've already spoken about gambling. Can you speak a little bit to what clarifies this idea that it pays its own way?
Yeah, it doesn't. Look, to be fair, it's very hard to track the money trail through the WA state budget, through the racing organisations in WA, and right down through to the greyhound codes. And, okay, that may be deliberate. It's very hard to keep a track of where this money trail goes. I reckon we did it, but it took us a long time. And I tell you what, I spent a lot of time trailing through the detail of budget papers trying to find where this money goes and where it comes from. And the code does pay tax, so they do generate some benefit to the state. That's true. Like, I pay tax in New South Wales. I generate a benefit to the state of New South Wales. But also, as you said, there's a lot of things that are funded by the taxpayer. And we worked out it was about $32 million per year. This is in the budget papers. I suggest if you're really interested, go and have a look. About half of that prize money. So a lot of people think that prize money comes from sponsors or from wagering, and some of it does. But the vast majority of it comes from the government, from taxpayers who are subsidising things like subsidies for the clubs, funding for things like improvements to tracks, breeding bonuses. If you breed certain types of dogs, a number of dogs, you get some funding from government. There's grants from RAWA, the racing authority in WA, and it ends up to about $32 million. That's an enormous amount of money. And as we found in our study, the actual costs of the code are greater than the benefits. And without that government money, it'd be even worse. So it's basically the WA government propping up a failing industry. When you look at the trends over time, attendance, the number of dogs running are all going down. The amount of money that's wagered on dogs, and this could be a good thing, is going down.
Yeah. But
it shows you that interest in the code is basically falling at about 15 to 20% per year.
Awesome.
So the interest in the code is dwindling.
Yeah.
And yet the money that the government's still pouring in is about $30 million a year or thereabouts. And we know the global trends, of course. I'm sure all your listeners know the global trends, that There's only a handful of countries left doing this activity now. We're one of them. So the global trends are pretty clear. And yet, without that government funding, it's pretty much propping up an industry that wouldn't be able to stand up on its own.
So jumping on the other side of the argument again, just so you can help clarify it for me and for our listeners, we'll often hear from the pro-racing mob that they do get funded from government, but they get funded from the massive amount of gambling revenue. The tax on that is where they get their funding from. And I've often said, hang on, I work in mental health. The tax I pay doesn't necessarily go back into mental health. It just goes into a pool of funds that the government then, dishes out on a needs basis. Is there a bit of a furphy in their argument that they're self-funded because it's coming back to them, the money that they generate anyway? That's not normal, is it? That's not how tax systems
No, it's very
work.
unusual. It is very unusual that the money that you generate from wagering, and there are various wagering taxes that collect money, not just on money wagered in WA, but people betting elsewhere, including overseas and in Australia, there's tax levied on that as well. So it does generate tax. But yeah, you're right. In say the health budget, there's Medicare is one example where we all pay a Medicare levy, and that does fund public health services, but it's not the only funding. Whereas in greyhound racing, it tends to be government raises all this gambling tax on the wagering, and then it funnels it back into the industry. It is quite an unusual arrangement relative to other funding that governments provide, as you said, into mental health or education or defence or any other part of it, what governments spend money on. Yeah. It is really unusual. So some of that revenue is self-generated, that's true, but overwhelmingly the government pays out a whole lot more than what is generated in terms of activity for the state.
Yeah, right. So it doesn't pay for itself. We can sort of underline that point.
It doesn't. And even in the broader benefits, when you account for all the things that economists look at in terms of the benefits from things like people attending a race meeting and buying a beer or buying a hot dog, that generates a benefit to someone. Someone's making and selling that hot dog. But also through employment, it's pretty small, frankly, but there's about, I think it's just over 1,000 people employed directly in greyhound racing if you include trainers and breeders and the like. So they're generating income, they're generating activity, there's vets, there's dog food sellers. Like, you can build up these benefits, that's all true. But as soon as you include things like the gambling losses and animal welfare costs, and we also looked at things like low productivity. Greyhound racing, and I don't want to get lost in the weeds here for non-economists, but productivity is a really important thing. It drives living standards in Australia. It's the only thing that drives your living standards. And greyhound racing is a really low productivity activity. And you can examine this through various things like the rents paid on various land holdings, the wages paid. They're all pretty low. That's because productivity is really low. So the more resources you pour into this industry or this code, the lower your productivity is around for the whole state. You'd be much better off using those scarce resources that the government has and pouring them into something that's much more productive. It would help the broader society. On a financial basis, it doesn't pay for itself. It couldn't stand up alone. And on a broader economic basis, the costs really outweigh the benefits.
And we'd be better off having those people that are currently involved in greyhound racing, if they're hobbyists as well, to possibly be working in a totally different industry that is more productive for a lot more people. Is that right?
That's right, Mel. We looked at it, and as you well know, that most of the participants are hobbyists. So they might work somewhere else and then own some greyhounds and race them, and some of their income comes from that. If they were to do something else, so stop breeding greyhounds, stop racing them, and started doing something else, overwhelmingly, not everyone, but most of them would be able to earn more money in doing something else and therefore be more productive for the broader economy if they stopped doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just pulling out one little bit from your report, Stephen, around that lack of productivity. Inefficient land use of WA's greyhound tracks creates an opportunity cost of more than $3 million every year. Specifically, you quote the track at Cannington. Bunnings is about half the size of the track, which is right next to it, and yet it generates millions more in economic value. So there's just one example of what you're talking about, I guess. And that begs the question, why are we propping up? I can get propping up something because it's in its nascent stages and you want to build to something. This industry isn't new. This industry, as you said, is declining. Do you have a sense of why we continue to prop this up? What's the motivation? What's the vested interest?
Well, it does provide some tax revenue. So there's that. And I think government likes getting tax revenue, obviously, and that funds education and healthcare in WA and roads and everything else. But I think it's a cultural thing. And I'm in New South Wales, and I remember when Premier Mike Baird over here just over 10 years ago shut down Greyhound racing. And I remember what happened. It was a big outcry about, oh, what about the vets and what about the people who drive dogs around and what about the breeders and so on. And you all know what happened. It was reopened again a few months later. So I think there is a bit of a cultural clinging to greyhound racing.
Right.
Like it's a very small cohort of people that are engaged in greyhound racing. It's not like thoroughbred racing or even trotting. They have their own flaws, but they're larger. They're typically not hobbyists. It's much more professional in that sense. It's more organised. It's bigger. Greyhound racing is a long-term legacy code that, frankly, the rest of the world is just not supporting anymore. So it's a hard one. Like I can't really get inside the heads of people who have within their power to keep this code going or not. But I think it is just a legacy thing. Some people love it, of course. If you're turning up at Cannington Central or Mandurah or Northam every week and watching dogs run around a track, there's reasons you're doing that. Whether you love gambling or whether you love getting away from your husband or whatever it may be, I don't know. But people do love that. So there's always going to be people upset if you shut it down. And I know from my engagements with government over decades, they don't like upsetting people.
Yeah, I hear your argument. You know, things that are culturally embedded take a while to move away from, to progress away from. I want to ask you a little bit more about just around the other costs around chronic injuries, the extensive time these beautiful creatures are confined in a cage, lack of enrichment, the psychological harms that go with that, let alone 788 injuries in a single year in WA alone, increasing dog deaths. There's all these other factors that come in. Has that been considered within what you've done?
Yeah, we did. So we did a lot of research into the costs. And you mentioned some of those things about, the way animals are treated and obviously welfare issues. And a lot in the code would argue they've come a long way and they've improved a lot. And I think it's 10% of funding goes towards animal welfare. Some of the prize money, 1%, 99% doesn't. But so there's been some mitigation, and we took that into account. What economics can't do, though, and I must be honest with this, is that we can only value the economic value of that particular racing dog. And we worked out what that was. Now, we worked out what it costs to actually buy a racing pup, because some of them on average are around sort of $8,000 to higher, depending on the breeding. That's important. We can also value what it takes to train that dog, to kennel it, to feed it. What we can't value is what you mentioned. Like, what is the value of that welfare of that dog, or an injured dog, or one that's mistreated and kept in terrible conditions? Economics hasn't quite got its head around that, frankly.
Yeah.
There is an arm of economics called welfare economics that looks at these sorts of things, have had impacts on, mainly for humans, to be honest, about mental health and well-being and quality of life.
Yeah.
Very hard to do that for greyhounds. Maybe that's a piece of extra work that probably should be done at some point, because we came up with the cost of animal welfare at only a couple of $1 million, which I admit probably grossly undervalues the welfare costs of what goes on. We try to include things like the value that people like yourselves and other animal welfare groups spend and time on improving animal welfare, but in economics, again, if there's no price, if you're not being paid to do that, we know a lot of the activities behind the scenes about improving welfare and rehousing dogs are all done on a voluntary basis.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's not in the measured economy. It's really hard to do. So I'll admit that was one part of the study that we struggled with, because having engaged with you and others and Mel and Free the Hounds particularly, and the animal welfare people, and I could hear your passion. And yet we came up with quite a low value, and hopefully I've just explained why that was, because we look at economic values. We couldn't quite get around to the welfare values, but I suggest there's probably more work to be done there.
Yeah, 100%. And I think I want to focus a little bit on that because I've become a part of that community, and the energy and time and effort and need to build your own financial resources is massive. And I think what really rubs salt into the wound is that while the other mob are claiming benefit and reaping whatever rewards they reap, often what's left over, what gets picked up, the mopping up that occurs, happens with community, grassroots, advocacy groups, and I don't think that gets measured either in the economics of the cost benefit.
No, you're right, Matthew, it doesn't. So when we go to the core data, we used state government data. We weren't trying to suggest the state government was being disingenuous here. We used whatever numbers we could out of the WAWA and WAGRA. Sorry for the acronyms, but you know who they are.
Yep.
We used their annual reports. We looked at their data, their audited annual reports. They've got requirements to keep all those numbers accurate, and we used those. We went to the ABS, the Bureau of Stats, that told us how many workers were actually involved in, for example, horse and dog racing in Western Australia. We went to the census. Those numbers are tiny. Like the census, the last census in 2021 recorded there were only 67 people working full-time in dog racing in Western Australia.
Right.
Like, that is a minutely small number in a state of 2 million people.
Yeah.
And to your point, there's vast numbers of people we know are outside the measured, for example, the census. If you're answering the census, you're probably not going to say you're working in animal welfare. You mentioned you're working in mental health.
Yeah.
So the census doesn't capture that either. So we know that a lot of the hours and a lot of the time and the money that's spent on rehoming and rehabilitating dogs is voluntary, and it's not included in these numbers. You're right. So we struggled to get data on that. And by the way, these studies are not perfect. They're rigorous, and I think we've done a really rigorous job and a really detailed. Like, we got every number we possibly could find.
Yeah.
And we've underestimated how much time is spent on these issues because you just can't measure it properly.
Yeah. You've done your best and we've done our best to sort of give an overview of what you're saying. Where and when can people have a good look at it?
That'll be one for Mel, I think, or the Animal Australia people. I might leave that one with you, Mel.
Yeah. Animals Australia haven't sort of given a time frame yet. It'll be up to them to when they're going to release it.
All right, we'll just scratch that question
that question, yeah.
All right, I'll finish on a much better one then. Stephen, given everything you've said and knowing the sort of the general conclusions of your report, basically it says that the benefit to cost ratio for the government in terms of greyhound racing is sitting at 0.79. So I believe what that means is that every dollar invested in greyhound racing causes a loss of $1.26 to the community. So
that's exactly right.
That's right.
That's not very good betting odds, is it?
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not. But in economic theory, and again, I won't get into the weeds here, you should only undertake activities that have a benefit-cost ratio above 1. So in other words, benefits of 101 and costs of 100 are worth doing. It's marginal. Yeah. What you'd really want is a much bigger number of, say, 1.8 to 1. So in other words, you spend $100 and you get a benefit of 180.
Yeah.
That seems like a much more sensible activity to do. Frankly, in economic theory, anything that's below 1, and as you said, Matthew, this is 0.79, so a long way below 1, you're destroying economic value because you're spending $100 and you're only generating a benefit of $79 every single dollar you spend.
Right.
So welfare, we talked about welfare, economic welfare for Western Australians would be improved if you shut down this code.
Right.
That's the clear conclusion.
That sentence really sums everything up for me. Again, I come more from a welfare perspective. That's where my passion lies. But I know for a fact that a vast majority of people think about the hip pocket. And what you're saying is, even if you don't give a rat's ass about animal welfare, this is hitting West Australians in the hip pocket in a degenerative way, in an ongoing declining way.
Exactly. Put it another way, if this code stopped, everyone in Western Australia would be slightly better off. Some more than others, but on basis across the whole state, the state would be better off in economic terms. And as I mentioned earlier, we didn't include all the stuff around animal welfare and voluntary work and all the sort of unmeasured hours and work and heartbreak that goes into this. We couldn't measure that.
Yeah.
This is on pure economic grounds. According to economic theory, Western Australians would be much better off if this code was no more. Now, people within the code would not be better off. They would hate it, but there's very few of them.
Yeah, yeah. And they could get jobs, really, or a lot of them could.
Well, hopefully, yes. Go and do something. They already have jobs, Mel. They've got jobs in other areas.
Yes,
they're
true,
hobbyists.
true.
So they've already got jobs. So maybe
find a new hobby that doesn't kill dogs.
Well, indeed, take up painting.
Yes. Oh, there you go. And so what would, I guess on a final note, what would your message to decision makers be about what will happen if they continue to do nothing?
Oh, you'll continue to drain parts of your economy. You'll keep a dead weight on productivity, and dogs obviously will continue to suffer, even with some of the mitigation that's in place, and some of the funding might help with that. But frankly, I'm giving you the economic perspective. You should stop this activity because it's draining your economy. It's in a very small way. Let's be honest. It's a really, really small industry, particularly in WA that's got massive natural gas and iron ore and agricultural exports and all the other activities that go on. Greyhound racing is tiny, but even with that, any industry where the costs exceed the benefits, you should stop doing it.
I feel like going down the track at Cannington one night, Mel, right? Dressing as a bookie, and I'll say, right, I'm taking bets. For every $1, I'll give you 79 cents. And I'll listen to him say, that's ridiculous. And I'll say, yeah, it is, mate.
There'd be nobody there.
Oh, that was very enlightening. There's a couple of things you said there, a couple of snippets I'd like to just take as a, what do they call it in the media, a soundbite, which hopefully will lead people to do a deeper dive once the report's released, but really encapsulated where we're at, where economically we're doing, frankly, stupid things in terms of greyhound racing.
In this particular case you are. There'll be others, but in this particular case, it's crystal clear. It wasn't even close. Like sometimes you do these studies, and I've done lots, and you get a benefit cost ratio of 1.02 or a 0.98, and frankly, it's like, well, maybe not.
Yeah.
This was not. The costs were so far above the benefits, and by the way, again, we didn't measure all the costs because we can't.
Yeah.
So it's even worse. So it's conservative, so it wasn't even close.
I hope at the very least what the government will do will look at your report and look at IER and at least have a second kind of report, if that makes sense, to look at. Because right now, the only thing that they base their information on is what Racing and Wagering WA produces through the IER. That is,
we've had the IER study, as you know, Mel, and we looked through all that. And, I've noticed the racing minister and the government refers to that study.
All the time.
So at that's like marking your own homework, to be honest. You need, and frankly, we didn't do this, as I said right at the start, with any particular outcome in mind. We took a blank sheet of paper and we came up with all the benefits we could, and we came up with what we thought were reasonable costs as well. And this is what we came up with. So that other work, I'm not trying to criticise other economists. I don't like doing that, but it was one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Whereas we've actually looked at both sides, and I think in a pretty... Like I remember when I presented the results to Animals Australia and had to say, look, sorry, the animal welfare cost is really low.
Mm-hmm.
We did this independently. I didn't try to come up with a number saying, the value of your heartbreak when a dog is injured is X. We can't do that in economics. Not yet.
Well, because you can't deal with infinite numbers in economics.
Well, no.
Just extraordinary. I really get a sense that, and I hope our listeners do, and I hope hopefully the government does, that you really have attacked this, Stephen, from an objective economic viewpoint, as someone who has looked at something to try and discover and explore what the true situation is. That's the sense I'm getting. And the fact that it happens to land quite unequivocally on the side of something that we're big proponents of, I think is wonderful. But what's more important is that you've attacked this with integrity and with objectivity. And so a big thank you from us for that.
Great. No problem. Thanks, Matthew, and thanks, Mel. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking your time today and, having a chat. We really appreciate it.
No worries. All the best.
Okay, you
Go
take
well.
care. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was episode 69, mate.
Yes.
What a ripper that was.
I know.
Hey?
Stephen's a very intelligent, thoughtful,
Yeah.
straightforward gentleman to speak to.
He's had an objective look at things as an economist, and he's found out that this thing can't stand on its own legs, like a lot of greyhounds have been raced.
Yep, exactly.
All right. I've been a bit hepped up today. My apologies.
It's okay.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Yeah, let's just keep fighting the good fight, shall we?
Absolutely. We're not stopping.
We shall release the hounds.
We shall.
See ya.